Thanks. Yeah, it's good to see the Minister is convinced of the benefits of democracy and the right of governments to decide on fiscal policy, given his support and advocacy for the fiscal treaty, the six-pack, the two-pack, which are all about...
And we don't block roads when ministers are going about their legitimate business.
No, but you do jail protesters because they go within 20 metres of water meters being installed by Dennis O'Brien's company, a major donor to your party.
We need no lessons in democracy from you, sir.
We don't need any lessons in democracy from you, I'm afraid.
Look, will we stick to the agenda, please?
Certainly. So start with the question of Greece, if that's okay. I would contend strongly that the negotiations from the point of view of the European institutions are not being carried out with the frame of mind of negotiations between partners to achieve a mutually beneficial solution. I would contend that negotiations are being carried out in order to inflict humiliation on the Greek government and on the Greek people in order to send a message across Europe. Don't take the risk with Podemos in Spain, don't vote for a left government in Ireland, don't vote for a left government in Portugal. It seems to me that the European institutions haven't taken seriously any of the very significant concessions made by Syriza, made by the Greek government, in the course of the negotiations, and they're not negotiating seriously from the point of view of finding an agreement. Would you concur with that analysis, or you think there just isn't agreement?
No, I think the institutions are negotiating in good faith. There are a number of examples of it appeared in the media without contradiction. One of the key requirements for the Greek authorities is that the primary surplus of 4.5%, which was originally required, would no longer be required. And I think that was a huge concession by the European institutions. As colleagues know, a primary surplus is the surplus you have if you don't have to make any debt repayments. So if you strip out debt repayments, you have the primary surplus, and the primary surplus is there to make the debt sustainable. Now, I mean, the negotiation position, as I understand it, they have offered a much lower primary surplus, I think 1% for 2015, and escalating up to 3.5% by 2017, 2018. But they have moved away from the primary requirement. And I'm only using that as an example to suggest to you that from what I've read in the media, and as I say, it wasn't contradicted by either side, there's a genuine effort by the institutions to meet a middle position. And I was talking to colleagues on the telephone last week, and it appeared to them, from their information from Brussels, that we were on the cusp of an agreement.
But it seems that the last paper that went from the Greek government to the institutions was dismissed out of hand, despite the fact that it represented an attempt to sum up the negotiations and a compromise. Because, say, in terms of the primary surplus, it's the case also that Syriza and the Greek government have moved. They've moved in terms of a rise in VAT. They've moved in terms of postponing the rise in the minimum wage. They've moved in terms of collective bargaining. They've moved in terms of pensions. They've moved on a whole range of issues. But yet the line that comes from the institutions is that the other side isn't seriously willing to negotiate. Is there not politics at play here? Just like when you talk about looking after our interests, isn't that the interests of the government as opposed to the Irish people?
First of all, my information, and as I say, I wasn't a party to the negotiations because I can only play a part in the negotiations at Eurogroup meetings and at ECOFIN meetings. We don't have an Irish representative at the technical talks, but neither does any other country. It's the representatives of the three institutions and the representatives of the Greek government. By the middle of last week, all information emanating publicly and privately suggested that both sides were compromising. And, you know, I can't endorse the individual items you mentioned, but within that range of items by the Greek authorities, there was certainly movement. But there was also a corresponding movement from the institutions. And by late Wednesday evening, it looked as if it were moving towards a resolution of the issue with an agreement. But that's not the position now. When the Greek Prime Minister spoke in the Greek Parliament on Friday night last, it was quite clear the situation had changed. And the gap now seems to be again unbridgeable.
Well, to go further on the question of our interests, right? I noted earlier on, I think you said you're against debt write-downs. Is that just debt write-downs for Greece? Are you against debt write-downs for Ireland if they were to be offered, or if we were able to get them if we were asked? Are debt write-downs only for tremendously rich private individuals paid for by the taxpayer and not for countries? Is it not the case that our interests coincide with the interests of ordinary people in Greece? We have similar targets from the Troika and from the EU institutions in terms of primary surplus. We spend a similar percentage of GDP on our interests, on our debt, on a yearly basis. We have similar high levels of debt, although obviously the Greek debt is higher. Do we not have a common interest in, say, even just within that framework of lower primary surplus targets and reduced debt?
Well, your last intervention is composed of a series of rhetorical questions, which aren't real questions. They're rhetorical questions to make political points. But as I stated at the start of the process we're engaged in now, we stated our position very early on. The first meeting that this was discussed at the Eurogroup and ECOFIN. At the meeting and publicly, I stated the Irish position was that we want Greece to stay in the euro area, in the euro, and we're opposed to any write-downs in Greek nominal debt. We also went on to say that we appreciated the difficulty of Greece, the amount of sacrifices made, the amount of suffering incurred by many ordinary individuals in Greece, and we were willing to participate in a negotiation which would alleviate the burden.
But very simply,
and there are other ways of doing that rather than nominal write-downs.
If Greece was to get a write-down in whatever way on its debt, would that not be beneficial to us, who still have a massive debt, still pay €7 billion a year in interest, a figure that will rise? Would it not be in our interest that there is a European debt conference and there's a process of write-down of unsustainable debt? I don't understand how it's not in our interest that we get our own debt written down together with the debt of Greece, Spain, Portugal, etc.
You see, we have substantially done our negotiations because we're no longer a programme country. And I said to the Greek Finance Minister that he should look at the way we resolved our problems when we were refused a write-down on the private debt element. And we resolved our problems by getting very long extensions of the maturities of the official loans to Ireland. We got all margin related to the moral persuasion issue. We got all the margins removed and we came down to very low interest rates on the debt. We negotiated a separate arrangement then to replace the promissory note, and you weren't here at the time, it was before you won that by-election, but we were obliged to pay £3.1 billion every March, and it was going to go on for more than a decade, and then diminishing amounts on for another decade. So what I'm saying is we negotiated to reduce the burden of debt, and our debt peaked at 123% of GDP last year. It's going to be at 109 at the end of this year. I'd hope to break the 100 with the measures we're taking on the budget, which will be announced on the 13th of October for the end of 2016. And if we're down at 100 or 99 at the end of 2016, the Eurozone average for debt is 94.5. So we're very near the average. And that's not taking into account any sale of assets, any sale of bank shares, or anything like that. Or indeed the adjustments which the CSO are going to make in early July when they take new ways of calculating GDP into account. That, I believe, will run in a small way to our advantage as well. So we did a negotiation. So what I'm saying, I have no animus to the Greek people. I like the Greek people. I get on reasonably well with the Greek Finance Minister, but I would prefer if he didn't interfere in Irish politics and start coming out making noises of approval about Sinn Féin. I don't make noises of approval about his political opponents. But that being said, he's a reasonable man to talk to, and he's an interesting person. But the issue is that he damages the balance sheet of every European country if he insists on the write-down of debt. on a nominal basis. On the other hand, if he negotiates an extension of maturities and a lowering of interest rates, even though Greek interest rates are very, very low on official debt already, there's scope there. And there is scope on things like the primary surplus, which has already been conceded by the institutions. But in these negotiations, you know, to get something, you have to give something. And that's the way we approached it.
Minister, thank you.
Just to carry on.